Peter Matlare, Deputy CEO of Absa. Welcome to Bloomberg, sir. Very good morning.
Thank you very much.
Let's get into the growth story. South Africa itself has escaped the risk of recession, but we have a global slowdown at play. What can you tell me about the business beyond South Africa in terms of momentum?
As you know, we sit in about 12 countries across the continent, and so it's always difficult to talk about it in a kind of simplistic globular sense. So if you look at different countries, say in West Africa, we're seeing some very good growth stories, in Ghana in particular, certainly in our businesses, but it's not just in our business, across that economy. I think that East Africa has been a little more constrained, particularly the large economies like Kenya. Good policies, good policy direction, but certainly from a macro perspective a little more constrained. And as you come down into Southern Africa, you see a mixed bag again. So low growth, but also some difficult economies at the moment. So the Zambian economy going through some very challenging times at the moment. But if you move across into Mozambique, we're beginning to see some very interesting green shoots, particularly coming out of the gas, oil and gas industry, etc. And of course, then you have the big kind of South Africa that impacts everything else in Southern Africa simply because of the size of the economy.
The political angst that we've seen here in South Africa around this forum that we're attending has the risk to reverberate beyond borders for African businesses. How concerned are you about this political angst that we're seeing here?
Look, the thing about political angst is that it no longer stays contained or confined simply because social media, entities like yours, broadcast this the wrong way. So you will find that there is always reaction to something that would happen in the South African context. We've certainly seen that in Zambia in this last year, and quite clearly, you know, when you begin to look at that impact, you have to ask yourself, what are our political leaders doing? I think they are trying to align themselves around a number of very important trajectories, whether it's around job creation, attracting investment, not just for one country, but across the region, etc.
The Pan-Africa Free Trade Agreement, which I'm surprised it's not been talked about more by my guests. Is there a reason why that's not been a higher item on the conversation agenda here?
I'm surprised if it hasn't been. We've certainly, in a number of the forums here at the WEF, had that as a very important backdrop to our discussions, remembering that, you know, it kicks in July next year, as you know.
Yes.
And it'll be a journey. I always remind people that if you think about the European Union or the European community as it started originally, this was in the 60s. I'm not suggesting we have to take as long as that, but you're talking across 50-odd countries across the continent, and therefore I think it's got a way to go, but some very clear deliverables along that way that have to be politically driven as well as economically supported.
When you look at the regions that you look after, if I said to you, what's the business mix going to be for you? Is it going to be more trade than it is corporate investment banking, than it is retail banking? What's going to be your focus?
So I think you'll see in the kind of corporate and investment banking space some very strong growth. But having said that, when I look at our mix,
yes,
you know, coming out of the sort of trade, business, SME sector, we are again also seeing some strong growth drivers. So I'd say to you, it's driven from the middle up. In the micro lending and micro space, there's always going to be some turbulence. It's the very nature of that part of the business. But certainly the kind of business banking and corporate and investment banking phase, you should see some decent, we've certainly seen double-digit growth in all of those areas over the last 5 years, and we anticipate that we should be able to sustain that.
Managing costs is an integral part of every business. For you, how's that going? As you expand, as you look at the regions that you look after, how's the cost control going?
You know, it's always a difficult one, because if you look at banking the way it's evolved,
yes,
so 60% of your cost sits in people, as opposed to in tech, as people tend to think. So that's going to evolve in the sense that new processing capability will mean that we have to retrain, reposition our people and our IP in order for them to serve the customer in a different way. Inevitably, in this new fourth industrial revolution that we speak of, the nature of work has to change, and so what people used to do a decade ago will fundamentally change in how we service our customers. So we all want to take cost out, but not at the expense of creating instability in society. So one always has to have that sensitivity. At the same time, we can't remain in the dark ages by not implementing a number of these new tech opportunities that will make it easier and better for the customer.
You've mentioned tech. If I said to you, where are you willing to spend for acquisition? Is it in the tech space? And if so, what are the budgets for acquisitions?
So if you look at what we've been busy with for the last 5 years, and that's been about taking out legacy systems, looking at investing in tech in order to update our systems. And so those budgets are decent budgets. One never throws around wonderful numbers such as those.
We like numbers at Bloomberg, though.
Absolutely, and I like to think conceptually you'd understand that they form an important part of our budgeting process. But certainly we've been investing significantly in tech, and we'll continue to do so, I think, for the foreseeable future.
You're the Deputy CEO. We're expecting a new CEO to be announced. Is it going to be Daniel Manele?
You know, the board is wonderfully charged with that responsibility. And whilst I'm the Deputy CEO, I always defer to my chairman in that regard as to who that would be. So I suspect it's great to address that question to her.